guys and welcome back to another video. I'm Shah and this is Thoroughly Enjoyed Books. Look how sad my shelves are. How depressing is that? Everything else is currently packed away, ready to be moved. I've actually already taken some books up to the new place. It's really sad. As you are all very much aware, it is currently Pride Month. It's a little bit different this year, obviously with the Black Lives Matter movement that is still going on, despite it disappearing a lot from Twitter and the media. It is still very much alive. It is still going on. So I will leave links down below to all the petitions and the funds and everything that you can donate to, as well as more information. Let's just try and keep the momentum going. As I said in a previous video, I'm doing shout outs in every video from now on. So today I'm going to give a shout out to Zoe from Zoe's All Booked. You might recognise Zoe's face from You're a Book Nerd, Zoe, and that's the reason she's getting a call out today. She's actually rebranded her channel and is now going by Zoe's All Booked. Highly recommend you go and check her out. She is so sassy, she is so much fun, and I love her videos where she does dramatic readings of the books that she has read, and it's so much fun. She's also recently had a baby and he's absolutely adorable, so if you love babas, you definitely need to check her out. Today I am bringing you my recommendations of 5 literary fiction LGBTQ books. These are all books that I have read either while I was at university or I'm currently reading. I actually think all of them I read for university. As you know, I'm currently studying my Masters in English Literature, particularly modern literature, and I specialise in queer fiction. So these are all books that, as a queer lit academic, can you call me that? Am I allowed to claim that title? I'm not sure. Are books that I highly recommend that you go and check them out. So since they are literary fiction, they are probably not that talked about that much on BookTube. They're not classed as contemporary fiction. They're not romance. They are very much literary fiction. A lot of them are very trigger heavy because they explore very serious, very dark topics. But I will mention those, and any that I find out later on or remember later on, I'll leave in the description box down below. So do check those out before you read these books because, like I said, some of them are really, really triggering. So I have 5 books to share with you today. They are all different eras, so you can get a real sense of queer fiction throughout the years by reading these. Let's go back to the start, to the 1920s, with the first book I have to recommend, which is The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. And this is set in the late 1800s and follows our main character, Stephen. Stephen was born and assigned female at birth. However, this book follows the fact that they have no idea what their gender is. They are exploring that throughout this book. Their gender, their sexuality. It is considered to be one of the earliest transgender fiction novels, even though Stephen doesn't identify as transgender, but their family named them Stephen because they really wanted a boy and they raised her as if she is a boy. The reason I'm using she is because I believe the book also uses she as the pronouns, and basically this explores nature and nurture. It's a very early look at transgender and gender identity, so it is quite dated in a lot of ways, so bear that in mind when you read this book. If you're looking for discussions on pronouns and identity, it's not in the same vein as now. We're not going to get the same references as now. You're not going to get the same terminology and the same progressiveness as back then, because as I said, it was written 100 years ago. But it is a very interesting look at how gender was perceived back then. Stephen, again, doesn't identify as a lesbian because I think when this book was written it wasn't quite termed or it wasn't used as often, but there is a female-female attraction within this book. I can't quite remember if it's a romance. And this isn't a happy book whatsoever. This is a very dark book. I think you get from the title, The Well of Loneliness, you know, a pit of despair, that kind of thing. So it is very dark and it's very emotional and it is difficult to read at times, but it is a very good look at early queer fiction. The next book I have to recommend was written in the 1940s and published in the 1950s, and that is Another Country by James Baldwin. I've talked about James Baldwin quite a lot recently, and I actually really enjoy his work. I've only read a couple of his essays and I think 2 of his books, and I really want to read more. Another Country is set in the 1940s, I believe, and it follows a bisexual black man who begins a relationship with a white woman. This has a lot of dark themes. Again, it has bisexuality, interracial relationships in the 1940s, which of course was a huge thing. James Baldwin did a lot of work on the civil rights movement, so there are elements of that woven into this book, even though it is before the main civil rights movement that you're probably familiar with. It's written before the time of Martin Luther King, but it follows all of those really strong themes. There are triggers in here for depression and suicide and violence, racial violence and things like that. So again, another really dark topic. I feel like James Baldwin is having a bit of a revival at the minute in light of Pride Month and Black Lives Matter. He's kind of a really good intersection of the two, and I highly recommend you check out his works, and I just think he's a really fantastic writer. Definitely check him out. Moving on to the 1980s then, we have 86 by David B. Feinberg. This book follows the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and it is fantastic. I've not actually finished this one. I do want to preface this by saying, but I do really want to finish it. I think I've read the first 60% of this book. This is Own Voices. I think all of these books are actually Own Voices. So this book was written by David B. Feinberg, who was gay, and he also passed away from AIDS. He was writing about his own experience as a gay man in the 1980s, and the book is split into two halves, pre the AIDS crisis and post the AIDS crisis, and it follows the taboos of being gay, the way people were treated, how AIDS was perceived, how gay culture changed in the 80s, throughout the 80s, because of the AIDS crisis. It's a really harrowing book, and the difference between the first half and the second half is so interesting to read about. We have all these perceptions of gay men being really flamboyant and really camp, a lot of homosexuality amongst the gay communities in the 1980s, and that is depicted in this book, but then countering this in the later part of the book is so powerful. I just think it's a fantastic read. There's so much about the legacy of AIDS in this book. Even though David B. Feinberg died, I believe, in the 90s, you can see how the experiences of these people in the 80s really affects how we view people now, and how the AIDS crisis is an ongoing crisis. Like I said, difficult because it does have AIDS, it has discussion of depression, suicide, mental health, homophobia, all those kind of things as well. And it's a very underrated book, I think. I think this might even be out of print. I know it was quite difficult to get a hold of when I needed it for uni. That's all the more reason to pick it up, I think. The next book I have, I think, was also published in the 80s, and that is Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. I love this book. I absolutely love this book. This is one of my favourite books of all time. I wrote my undergraduate dissertation on this book. I just think it's absolutely phenomenal and I love it. This is a semi-autobiographical novel. It follows our main character, Jeanette, who, like I said, semi-autobiographical. Not everything in this book actually happened, but it was inspired by things that actually happened. Jeanette was adopted by a highly religious family and then discovers she's a lesbian. And in this book, she explores what it is like living in a Christian household and being gay and how that impacted her. It has fairy tales interwoven into it. It has historical fiction. It explores what it means to be a parent, I think, and I think that's something that isn't often discussed with this book. The fact that Jeanette is adopted and then her parents reject her, which isn't a spoiler, that's pretty much what this book is about, is such an interesting thing that I think people kind of overlook. I don't want to talk about this book too much because I've spoken about it so many times, but I think that this book is just amazing, and I will talk about this book until everybody has read it. I think everybody needs to read it. It's only very short as well. Most of Jeanette Winterson's books are under 200 pages. If I had it with me, I would show you it, but it's packed away somewhere and I don't want to be doing that. It is semi-autobiographical, and a lot of people started ignoring the semi part and just saying that this is a story about Jeanette Winterson's life, which it isn't. And in response to that, she ended up writing Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which is the biography, her autobiography, and it kind of talks about what was and wasn't real in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. So go pick it up. And then the last book that I have to talk about on this list is also the most recent book that I read, and that is Affinity by Sarah Waters. Sarah Waters is very highly regarded in the gay literature world. Her books are fantastic. I have now read 3 of them. I think she only has 6, so I've read half of her backlist, which is, I have a few more that I need to get to. Sarah Waters writes primarily lesbian fiction. That is what she calls the books that she writes, apart from one which doesn't have any queer themes. Affinity, I think, is one of her most underrated books. People talk a lot about Dip in the Velvet and Fingersmith. I even see The Little Stranger talked about quite a lot, but I never see people talk about Affinity. This was the second book that she published, and this is set in a women's prison. It's kind of a ghost spirit story as well. It features a psychic, and our main character volunteers at a women's prison and begins to fall in love with one of the prisoners who turns out to be a psychic. This explores so many things that I'm really interested in. It explores the prison system, it explores sexuality, it explores mental health in the Victorian age. Sarah Waters primarily writes historical fiction, and this is what I'm planning on doing my master's dissertation on, so I don't want to talk too much about it now because I have a feeling I will talk about it a lot in the future. I highly recommend this Sarah Waters book because I think, like I said, it's really underhyped. It's also her shortest book. It's under 400 pages, and if you know anything about Sarah Waters, her books are huge. I actually have one behind me. Should I get it? Yeah. This is the next one of her books that I have to read, and it is just under 500 pages. Just under 500 pages, so it's chunky. I honestly really recommend you check out Sarah Waters. Obviously, I recommend you check out all of these books if you're interested at all in queer literary fiction. I don't really know what the definition of literary fiction is, but I know that these definitely fit it. And like I said, most of these books I studied for university. The only one I didn't study for university was Affinity, and that's the one I'm looking at doing my dissertation on, so... Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of these books, and if so, what did you think of them? Also, if you have any other queer recommendations for literary fiction, please send them my way because I just want to read it all. I obviously have a lot of other queer books that I'm currently reading, and I do have a couple more recommendation videos that I'm going to be doing throughout Pride Month, so do please keep checking back for more of those videos. I hope you enjoyed it. As usual, I'll be leaving links to my Twitter and my Goodreads and all that good stuff down below, and I can't wait to see you in another video very, very soon. Take care. Bye.